The summer my friend went to Panama City Beach was supposed to be forgettable. That's how most summers were for kids like us. You went somewhere cheap if you were lucky, stayed home if you weren't, and when school started again everything blended into the same routine. Nothing about our lives suggested that 1 week near the ocean could quietly rewrite the future. We were too young to understand that some moments don't announce their importance. They arrived disguised as ordinary days. He was 13 then, skinny, awkward, still figuring out how to exist in his own body. His family didn't have much money, so the trip itself already felt unreal to him. Georgia summers were hot and heavy, full of sweat and dust, not like the glossy postcard version of summer you see in movies. Panama City Beach felt like a different planet. Tall condos, bright lights at night, people who spent money without thinking twice. For him, it was exciting and intimidating at the same time. The beach was always crowded. Families dragging coolers across the sand, kids screaming as waves knocked them over, older teenagers showing off like they owned the place. Music floated from everywhere, overlapping into one constant hum. It was easy to feel invisible there, just another kid among hundreds. That invisibility is probably why no one noticed what was happening. Or maybe they noticed and assumed it didn't matter. He met her on the second day. She was sitting near the water, sunglasses on, legs pulled up, watching the waves like she'd seen them 1,000 times before. She didn't look like someone who belonged there either, but for different reasons. Everything about her felt polished. Her clothes looked expensive without trying too hard. Her phone wasn't cracked. Her confidence didn't come from acting tough, it came from knowing she'd be okay no matter what happened. She was 15. 2 years older doesn't sound like much when you're older, but at that age it felt like a lifetime. She spoke like someone who'd already lived more life than him. She laughed easily. She asked questions that made him feel interesting, like his answers mattered. For a kid who rarely felt seen, that was enough. They started talking, then meeting again and again over the next few days. Sometimes it was just sitting on the sand, sometimes walking along the water, sometimes sharing food his family had packed. He learned she was from Ohio. Her family owned businesses. They stayed in a condo that had security and elevators and a view that made you feel important just by standing there. He didn't fully understand what rich meant yet, but he knew it was something far away from his life. What he didn't understand then, what none of us did at that age, was how fragile boundaries really are when no one enforces them. Adults assume kids will stop themselves. That innocence will act like a barrier. But innocence doesn't protect you from consequences. It just keeps you from seeing them coming. Those days blurred together. The sunburns, the salty air, the feeling that the world was bigger than it had ever been before. They talked about music, school, stupid things, serious things they didn't really understand. She told him stories about flying, about places she'd been. He listened like it was all unreal, like she was describing another universe. No one asked questions. No one stopped them. To everyone else, they were just two teenagers killing time by the ocean. The beach has seen worse, people probably thought. Kids being kids. The night it happened didn't feel dramatic in the moment. There was no sense of danger, no warning voice in his head telling him this would follow him forever. It felt secret, exciting, confusing. The kind of moment people later describe as a mistake only. Because of what comes after. When the trip ended, reality returned fast. His family packed up. They drove back to Georgia. The ocean disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by highways and gas stations and silence. It felt like waking up from a dream. Something that intense couldn't possibly matter once it was over. That's what he told himself. That's what kids always tell themselves. For a while, life went on. School started again. Homework, friends, stress. Growing up, the memory of that week slowly dulled around the edges, like a photo left in the sun too long. He didn't talk about it. Not to his friends, not to his parents, not to me. It became one of those things you lock away because there's nowhere safe to put it. Then the messages started. At first, they were casual. Checking in, joking, reminding each other they existed. Long distance felt harmless through a screen. It didn't feel real enough to be dangerous. But gradually the tone changed. The jokes stopped. The replies took longer. There was tension in her words that he didn't know how to name. When she finally told him, it wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no accusations, just a sentence that landed heavy and refused to move. She was pregnant. He didn't believe it at first. How could he? 13-year-olds don't become fathers. That's something adults deal with. That's something you hear about on the news, not something that happens to kids who still worry about passing math class. His brain rejected it like it was bad information. But she didn't take it back. She didn't soften it. She just kept saying it was real. Fear arrived slowly, then all at once. Fear of his parents. Fear of the law. Fear of being exposed. Fear of ruining his life before it had even started. He had no frame of reference for what came next. No idea who to tell, what to do, or how to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Her family found out not long after. That was when the situation changed in a way he didn't fully understand until much later. Her family didn't panic the way he did. They didn't spiral. They didn't argue loudly or threaten. They moved quietly, efficiently, like people who were used to solving problems without leaving fingerprints. Lawyers were involved. Doctors. Conversations happened that he was never part of. Decisions were made without asking him what he wanted, because what he wanted didn't matter. He was a complication, not a participant. She never told them who he was. Not his name. Not where he lived. Nothing that could trace back to him. Whether that was her choice or theirs, he never knew. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was control. Maybe it was both. What he did know was that no one came looking for him. No police. No social workers. No angry parents at his door. Life didn't explode the way he expected it to. It just kept going, carrying this massive secret underneath like a fault line. He told me months later, sitting in a place where we used to hang out, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't cry. He looked numb, like he'd already spent all the emotion he had on it. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing someone our age could say that would make it okay. He kept saying the same thing over and over, like repeating it would make it make sense. That she was rich, that her family handled it, that nobody knew, that nobody could ever know. At 13, he became someone carrying a secret meant for adults. A secret heavy enough to shape the rest of his life. And the strangest part was how normal everything looked from the outside. No one suspected anything. No one saw the invisible weight he dragged behind him. The summer ended. The seasons changed. And somewhere far away, a life had begun that would always be connected to his, whether the world acknowledged it or not. After he told me, nothing about him felt the same anymore, even though everything around us looked exactly as it always had. That's the strange thing about secrets that big. They don't change the world, they change the way you see it. He still went to school. He still laughed at dumb jokes. He still complained about teachers and homework. But underneath all of it, there was something else now, something heavy and quiet that never left him. At first, he thought the situation would somehow resolve itself. That there would be a call saying it wasn't true, that there had been a mistake, that the doctors were wrong. Kids cling to impossible hope because reality feels unbearable otherwise. But the weeks passed, and nothing like that happened. Every message from her made it more real. She told him about doctor visits, about being sick in the mornings, about how her parents were watching her constantly now. He read those messages over and over, feeling like he was reading someone else's life. There was a disconnect between what he was doing, sitting in class, playing video games, eating dinner with his family, and what she was experiencing. It felt wrong that the world allowed that kind of separation. He asked what would happen next. She didn't have answers. Or maybe she did, but they weren't answers he was allowed to hear. The people making decisions weren't thinking about him. They were thinking about reputation, about appearances, about keeping everything controlled and contained. Her family's money created a wall he couldn't see through. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Plans were made that didn't include his voice. At 13, he had no power, no leverage, and no understanding of his rights. He only understood fear. He worried constantly that someone would show up at his house. That his parents would find out from someone else. That his life would collapse in a single afternoon. Every knock on the door made his stomach tighten. Every unknown number on his phone made his heart race. But no one came. Instead, what came was silence. Heavy, intentional silence. The kind that doesn't happen by accident. She stopped talking about him to everyone around her. At school, she carried the pregnancy quietly, dressed in ways that hid it as long as possible. Stories were created to explain what didn't fit. Rumors were redirected. Her parents handled things the way people with resources do, smoothly, discreetly, without drama. He remained invisible. The baby was born months later. He knew the date because she told him. A short message. No details. just enough to confirm that it had happened. That somewhere in Ohio, a life had entered the world connected to his in a way that could never be undone. He didn't know what to feel. Pride felt wrong. Fear felt useless. Guilt felt overwhelming. He was old enough to understand that a child existed because of him, but too young to do anything about it. That kind of helplessness leaves a mark. For a long time, they didn't talk much after that. The intensity of the situation faded into something quieter but more permanent. An understanding settled between them without ever being spoken. This was how things would be. Separate lives. Shared secret. As he grew older, the weight of it changed. At first, it was panic. Then it became something like numb acceptance. He learned how to live around it. How to keep it locked away in a place where it couldn't interfere with his daily survival. High school came and went. He worked small jobs. He worried about money, about the future, about things most kids worry about when they don't have much. All the while, there was a version of his life he never talked about, even in his own head. Occasionally, she would reach out. Not often, just enough to remind him that this wasn't a dream. That the child was growing. That time was passing whether they acknowledged it or not. Years later, she came to visit him for the first time since the pregnancy. Quietly. No announcements. No photos. She flew down alone. They met like strangers who knew too much about each other. There was no romance in it, no illusion of what might have been. Just two people bound by something neither of them had chosen fully or understood when it happened. She showed him pictures then. That was the moment disbelief finally died. The kid had his face. Not in a vague way, not in a way you could argue about. It was obvious. The same eyes, the same expression, the same look he got when he was thinking too hard about things he couldn't fix. He stared at those photos longer than he meant to. Something cracked inside him, something he had kept sealed for years. Seeing proof made it real in a way words never could. This wasn't an abstract consequence anymore. This was a person, a child with a life, a personality forming, memories being built without him. She told him the kid didn't know. No father, no explanation that pointed back to him. Just an absence that had been normalized. A gap filled with other things, school, activities, family, money, opportunities he'd never had. He asked if the child ever asked questions. She said sometimes, not in a way that forced answers. Not yet. When she left, the silence returned. But it was different now. He had seen what he'd been pretending wasn't real. He couldn't unknow it. He never told anyone else. Not friends, not girlfriends, not family. The risk was too high. The damage too unpredictable. And so the secret stayed where it had always been, between him and me, growing heavier with time. By his early 20s, the panic was gone. In its place was something more complicated. A constant, quiet awareness. A knowledge that his life wasn't as simple as it looked from the outside. He watched other people his age become parents the normal way. He listened to them complain, laugh, struggle. He nodded along, never saying that he understood more than they realized. Some nights, he wondered what would happen if the truth came out. If the child would hate him. If his parents would feel betrayed. If it would destroy the fragile balance that had been maintained for so long. Most nights, he pushed those thoughts away. The secret had survived this long. It felt safer to let it keep surviving, even if that meant living with the weight of it forever. By the time he turned 25, the secret had been with him longer than it hadn't. It wasn't something he actively thought about every day anymore. It lived deeper than thoughts, settled into him like a second spine, holding him upright in ways no one could see. He had learned how to function around it, how to laugh without giving it away, how to plan a future that carefully avoided certain questions. From the outside, his life looked ordinary. Work, bills, relationships that came and went. People knew him as quiet, responsible, maybe a little guarded, but nothing about him suggested the kind of truth he carried. That was part of what made it so effective. Secrets survive best when they hide inside normality. Every once in a while, she would contact him again. The messages were spaced out, sometimes months, sometimes years apart. They were never emotional, never dramatic, just updates. The kid was doing well in school. The kid liked sports. The kid was healthy. Always. The kid, never, your son. Language mattered. It kept the boundary intact. At some point, she sent another photo. The child was older now, his face more defined, the resemblance stronger instead of fading. Time had done the opposite of what my friend hoped. Instead of blurring the connection, it sharpened it. Every year made the similarities harder to deny. My friend didn't ask for the photos, but he never told her to stop sending them either. They were painful, but they were also the only proof he had that this wasn't just a story he'd told himself for too long. Without them, it would have been easier to pretend it never happened. He asked once if the kid knew anything at all. She said no, not his name, not his existence. There was no urgency in her tone, no sense that this would ever change. Her family had built a life that worked without him, and from their perspective, involving him now would only complicate things. The child had grown up with resources, good schools, stability, opportunities my friend never had. In some twisted way, that made the situation easier to justify. The kid wasn't suffering materially. He wasn't missing out on the kind of life my friend could have offered. That logic helped him sleep at night, even if it didn't erase the guilt completely. As the years went on, my friend started to think less like a scared teenager and more like an adult forced to live with a decision he hadn't fully made. He wondered what his role actually was. Was he a father if he'd never held his child? Was he responsible for someone who didn't know he existed? Did obligation require presence, or did absence count as a choice once enough time had passed? There were moments when the truth almost slipped. Conversations with girlfriends where the topic of kids came up. Casual jokes from friends about becoming parents someday. Questions from his own parents about the future. Each time, he navigated around it carefully, like stepping around a landmine only he could see. His parents talked about grandchildren the way parents do, half joking, half hoping. He would smile and deflect, never letting his face betray him. They had no idea that the future they spoke about had already happened somewhere else, 15 years ahead of schedule. The older he got, the more complex the silence became. It wasn't just about protecting himself anymore. It was about protecting everyone else from a truth that couldn't be revealed without consequences. His parents' trust, the child's sense of identity, the carefully constructed narrative that had kept everything stable for so long. There was also fear that if the truth came out, it would rewrite the past in ways no one could handle. That people would judge him not as a scared 13-year-old, but as the man he was now. That context would be lost. That compassion would disappear. Sometimes he imagined meeting the kid by accident. A chance encounter somewhere far from Ohio and Georgia. He imagined recognizing his own face in a stranger's. Imagined the urge to say something, to claim something, to explain. In those daydreams, he always stayed silent. He never knew how the conversation could end without causing damage. I watched him carry this over the years, never knowing if he wanted advice or just a witness. There was nothing I could tell him that would simplify it. There was no version of the truth that didn't hurt someone. When the kid turned 15, the same age his mother had been that summer, something shifted in him. Time closed a loop he couldn't ignore. The child was no longer an abstract idea or a little kid in photos. He was a teenager now, old enough to ask real questions, old enough to start noticing gaps in his story. My friend wondered if that would be the moment everything unraveled. If curiosity would push the truth to the surface whether anyone wanted it or not. But nothing happened. No messages, no urgency, just the same controlled silence that had defined the situation from the beginning. By then, my friend was 28. He had lived more years knowing he was a father than not. The fact still didn't feel real in the way people expect fatherhood to feel. There were no memories attached to it. No milestones, just knowledge. Sometimes he told me he felt like a ghost in someone else's life. A presence defined entirely by absence. Other times, he said he felt like a stranger to himself, like part of his identity had been quietly amputated and no one noticed. Despite everything, he never seriously considered telling his parents. Not because he didn't trust them, but because he couldn't predict what the truth would do to them. They would grieve years they could never get back. They would ask why he hadn't told them. And he had no answer that wouldn't sound like cowardice, even though it had once been fear. The secret had grown larger than him. It wasn't his alone anymore. It belonged to everyone connected to it, whether they knew it or not. And so life continued in this uneasy balance, the past locked away, the future uncertain, the truth hovering just out of reach, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. The older my friend got, the more the future started to feel like a narrowing hallway. Not because his life was going badly, but because the room for avoidance kept shrinking. When you're young, time feels endless. You assume there will always be a better moment to face things. But as years stack up, you start realizing that postponement doesn't erase responsibility, it just changes its shape. He didn't talk about the kid much anymore. Not because it stopped mattering, but because it had become part of the background noise of his life. Something constant and low, like a hum you stop noticing until the power goes out. He focused on work, on keeping his life stable, on being the kind of man people relied on. In some strange way, that was his version of penance. If he couldn't be present where it mattered most, he would at least be decent everywhere else. His parents aged in the ordinary, gentle way people do when life doesn't throw them too many surprises. They worried about him, asked about his plans, joked about the day he'd finally settle down. Every time they mentioned grandchildren, it landed differently for him. Not like a joke, not like a hope, like a reminder. Somewhere, a teenager already existed who made those conversations painfully out of sync with reality. He never corrected them. He never hinted. He let them imagine a future that, in truth, had already happened without them. The girl, now fully a woman with her own life, stopped reaching out altogether after a while. No more updates. No more photos. No more quiet visits. The silence became complete. At first, that scared him. He worried something had gone wrong, that something had changed without him knowing. But as months turned into years, he understood what it meant. She was closing the chapter. Her family had succeeded in what they set out to do all along. They had built a self-contained world where the truth wasn't necessary. The child had grown up without him and, as far as anyone could tell, was fine. The story they told had held. The absence had been normalized. And my friend had been erased. That realization hurt more than he expected. For years, he'd told himself that staying away was the right thing. That not interfering was a form of care. But being erased is different from choosing distance. Erasure strips you of even the illusion of relevance. He never knew if the kid ever asked more serious questions as he got older. He never knew if there were moments of confusion, resentment, or curiosity. He never knew if his name was spoken at all, even as a possibility. All he knew was that he existed in a space where nothing could reach him anymore. That's when the thought started to visit me more often. The one I'd had years earlier but never voiced. The idea of what would happen if my friend died suddenly. It wasn't morbid curiosity. It was logistics. Unfinished truths have a way of attaching themselves to the living. If he died, the secret wouldn't die with him. It would transfer. To me, I imagined standing in his parents' house, surrounded by memories of him, listening to them talk about the life he lived. I imagined the weight of knowing something that could shatter their understanding of their own past. I imagined the question they would never think to ask. Was there anything else we didn't know? I don't know what I would do in that moment. Would I tell them that they had been grandparents for 15 years without knowing it? That there was a teenager walking around somewhere with their blood, their features, their history? That their son had carried something alone because he was a child when it happened and never knew how to bring it into the light? Or would I stay silent, respecting the choice he made to keep it buried, even after he was gone? That's the part of this story that has no clean ending. There's no lesson that wraps it up neatly. No clear right or wrong. Just consequences unfolding quietly over time. My friend is still alive. The kid is still out there. The truth still exists, untouched, unchanged, waiting. Some secrets protect people. Others simply delay the moment when the damage becomes visible. And some secrets don't belong to the people who keep them. They belong to the people who will one day inherit them. This is one of those secrets. It has survived 15 years of silence. Whether it survives forever is something none of us can control anymore.